The sound you just heard wasn't a celebration. It was the starting pistol for the complete and utter demolition of a billionaire's life. At a table overlooking the glittering lights of Manhattan, Julian Croft, a titan of industry, raises a $2,000 bottle of Dom Perignon Rosé to toast his mistress. He whispers promises of a future, a new life, a world built just for them. But what he doesn't know is that miles away, in the cold silence of a lawyer's office, the woman carrying his unborn child has just put her pen down. With a single elegant signature, Eleanor Croft hasn't just filed for divorce. She has activated a hidden clause in their ironclad prenup, a clause he never bothered to read, and in one devastating moment, she has legally seized control of his entire fortune. He's toasting his future, not knowing his past has already consumed it. Julian Croft didn't just live in New York City. He owned a piece of its soul. His company, Croft Enterprises, had its name etched onto skyscrapers that clawed at the clouds. His personal residence was a sprawling penthouse on Fifth Avenue, a glass and steel eyrie with panoramic views of Central Park that made the city look like a jeweled carpet laid out for his pleasure. The walls were adorned with art that wasn't just decorative, but strategic Rothko for intellectual heft, a Basquiat for raw power. Every object in the 10,000 square foot space was a testament to his success, a monument to his ego. His wife, Eleanor Vance Croft, was often considered another one of his perfect acquisitions. She was the daughter of old money, possessing a quiet classical beauty and a degree in art history from Yale that made her the perfect hostess. She could discuss Renaissance sculpture with the same effortless grace she used to manage a staff of 12. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple, his ruthless ambition balanced by her refined elegance. They were a feature in Vogue, a name whispered with envy at charity galas, the embodiment of the Manhattan dream. But inside the gilded cage, the gold was cold to the touch. Julian saw Eleanor not as a partner, but as a curator for his life. She managed the home, the social calendar, and his public image, all with a flawless efficiency that he simply expected. Their conversations had long ago dwindled from shared dreams to logistical briefings. "The fundraiser for the Met is on Thursday, Julian," she'd say, her voice calm and even as she adjusted a floral arrangement. "I've confirmed our table. You'll be seated next to Senator Thompson." "Good. Make sure my tuxedo is pressed." "The one with the silk lapels," he'd reply, not looking up from the glowing screen of his tablet, where stock tickers scrolled like a digital waterfall. He spoke to her with the same clipped tone he used with his executive assistant. For 5 years, Eleanor had played her part. She had mistaken his initial ambition for passion, his possessiveness for love. She had believed that beneath the armor of the corporate raider was a man she could build a life with. But the armor was all there was. He was a man who collected beautiful things, art cars companies, a wife, and expected them to remain flawless and silent. The loneliness was an entity in itself, a constant, silent guest in their cavernous home. She'd walk through the marble hallways, her footsteps echoing in the silence, and feel like a ghost in her own life. The only warmth she found was in the small sunroom she had converted into her personal library, a place filled with books and plants that felt alive in a home that was otherwise a sterile museum. It was in that sunroom, one crisp September afternoon, that everything changed. For weeks, a subtle exhaustion had clung to her. A faint but persistent nausea greeted her each morning. She'd dismissed it as stress, but as she stood watering an orchid, a wave of dizziness so profound washed over her that she had to grip the back of a velvet armchair to steady herself. 2 hours later, she sat on the edge of her cold marble bathtub, staring at a small plastic stick in her trembling hand. A blue cross, unmistakable. Pregnant. A surge of conflicting emotions crashed through her. There was a flicker of joy, primal and fierce, a baby. A life. A piece of her that wasn't owned or curated by Julian. But it was immediately followed by a wave of cold dread. How could she bring a child into this emotional vacuum? What kind of father would Julian be? A man who saw family as a legacy, a dynasty, not a source of love and warmth. She decided to tell him that evening. She arranged for his favorite meal to be prepared by their private chef, seared scallops, followed by a dry-aged ribeye. She chose a bottle of his preferred Bordeaux, a 1998 Chateau Margaux. She wanted everything to be perfect, a soft landing for the news she hoped would bridge the chasm between them. He arrived home late as usual, shrugging off his custom-made coat and tossing it to the housekeeper without a word. He walked into the dining room, loosening his tie. "Long day," he grunted, sitting at the head of the long, polished table. "I understand," Eleanor said softly. "I was hoping we could talk. Is it about the gala? Because I already told you I can't sit through another one of your cousin's rambling speeches." "No, it's not about the gala," she said, her hands clasped in her lap. "It's something important, something personal." The chef served the scallops. Julian picked at his eyes already drifting back to the phone he had placed on the table beside him. "Just tell me, Eleanor. I have an early call with the Tokyo office." Taking a deep breath, she looked directly at him, her heart pounding. "Julian, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. He stopped chewing. He slowly placed his fork down and truly looked at her for the first time all evening. But the expression in his eyes wasn't joy or shock or even curiosity. It was calculation. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, unreadable smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, finally, picking up his wineglass. "That's efficient." Eleanor stared at him, bewildered. "Efficient?" "Of course," he continued, swirling the deep red liquid. "The air. It secures the Croft legacy. Good timing, actually. We can announce it in the winter issue of Vanity Fair. It's good for the brand." He took a sip of wine, his gaze distant, already planning the press release. He hadn't asked if she was okay. He hadn't asked if she was happy or scared. He hadn't reached for her hand. He had assessed the news as a business transaction, a strategic move that benefited his empire. In that moment, watching him process the creation of their child as a public relations opportunity, the last fragile thread of hope Eleanor had been clinging to, snapped. The love she thought she had for him, the love she had been trying to revive for years, curdled into something else. It was a cold, hard certainty. She was not his wife. She was his asset. And now she was carrying his most valuable asset yet. The gilded cage had just become a nursery, and she knew with terrifying clarity that she had to find a way out. Not just for herself, but for the tiny, innocent life growing inside her. Julian Croft's affair began, as many do not, with a thunderclap of passion, but with the quiet hum of mutual appreciation for beautiful, expensive things. The object of that appreciation was Serafina Monet. She wasn't a vapid model or a wide-eyed young intern. Serafina was a force of nature in her own right, the owner of a chic, minimalist art gallery in Soho called Monet Modern. She was sharp, ambitious, and possessed a predator's instinct for weakness. She had dark, expressive eyes, a mane of raven hair. She wore in a deliberately messy style, and a laugh that was low and smoky. She dressed in avant-garde European designs that made Eleanor's classic Chanel suits look quaint and matronly. Where Eleanor was old money grace, Serafina was new money hunger. She didn't just sell art. She sold a lifestyle, an illusion of being on the cutting edge of culture, and men like Julian were her primary clientele. They met when Julian was looking to acquire a major piece by a rising German artist. Serafina handled the acquisition. She wasn't just a dealer. She was a connoisseur of men like him. She understood that for Julian, art wasn't about emotion. It was about conquest and investment. During their initial meetings, she never flirted overtly. Instead, she engaged his intellect, his ego. She praised his discerning eye and his bold acquisition strategy. She spoke his language, the language of value, of scarcity, of owning something no one else could have. Most collectors are just decorating, she told him one afternoon in her gallery, a cavernous white space where a single unsettling sculpture stood in the center. They want something to match their sofa. You, Julian, you're building a collection. You're shaping the market. He was hooked. Here was a woman who didn't just admire his wealth. She admired the mind that had built it. She saw him, he believed, as the visionary he saw himself as. Their professional meetings soon bled into personal ones. A discussion over a painting would turn into a long lunch at Balthazar, where her hand would linger on his arm, a second too long. A late-night call about an auction would dissolve into intimate conversations about their ambitions. She created a world for him that was an antidote to the sterile perfection of his life with Eleanor. With Serafina, he felt adventurous, rebellious. She'd take him to underground art shows in Brooklyn, to exclusive speakeasies he didn't know existed. She made him feel like he was still a hunter, not just a king sitting on his throne. The physical affair started on a business trip to Art Basel in Miami. In the humid, hedonistic atmosphere of the city, away from the prying eyes of New York society, they fell into bed. For Julian, it was a release, a confirmation of his power and desirability. For Serafina, it was the closing of a deal that had been months in the making. She was the perfect mistress. She was demanding in a way that fed his ego, demanding expensive gifts, lavish trips, and exclusive access. But she never demanded the one thing he couldn't give legitimacy. She never complained about being the secret. In fact, she seemed to revel in it. Poor Eleanor, she'd say, with a smirk tracing the line of his jaw, as they lay in a suite at the Faena Hotel. Does she even know how to have fun? Or does she just organize it? Julian would laugh, the comment stroking his justification for the affair. He told himself he wasn't destroying his marriage. He was simply supplementing it. Eleanor was for legacy, for stability, for the public-facing brand of Julian Croft. Serafina was for him. She was his reward for the pressures of his life. He showered her with gifts. A rare Patek Philippe watch, a vintage convertible, a black American Express card with no limit linked to a private holding company to keep it off his main accounts. He was meticulous, he thought, in covering his tracks. He used burner phones, booked hotels under pseudonyms, and had his driver take convoluted routes. He was the master of his universe, and he believed he could compartmentalize his life with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his business portfolio. He never once considered the emotional toll on Eleanor, because he had long since stopped seeing her as a person with a rich inner life. She was a system that worked, One doesn't worry about the feelings of a system, only its function. And as long as his home ran smoothly and his public appearances were flawless, he assumed the system was content. The announcement of Eleanor's pregnancy barely registered as a complication to his affair. If anything, it made his compartmentalization feel even more justified. Eleanor was now fulfilling her primary function, producing an heir. That was her world. His world, the one where he felt truly alive, was with Serafina. A week after he'd learned he was to be a father, he was with Serafina at her Soho apartment, a loft space that was as sharp and stylish as she was. He had brought her a bottle of Cristal champagne to celebrate the closing of a massive deal. To us, Serafina purred, clinking her glass against his, and to all the beautiful things we're going to acquire together. To us, he repeated, his eyes dark with desire. He pulled her close, the city lights twinkling behind them. I have a surprise for you. I'm taking you to Paris next month, a private suite at the Ritz. Her eyes lit up. This was what she wanted. The trips, the jewels, the proximity to power. She kissed him deeply, a calculated performance of passion. "And what will you tell the wife?" she whispered against his lips. "A business trip, a conference in Geneva," he said, dismissively. She doesn't ask questions. She knows her place. He believed it absolutely. He believed Eleanor was at home contentedly planning a nursery, blissfully unaware of his other life. He saw himself as a master puppeteer, pulling the strings of his two separate worlds, never imagining that one of his puppets was about to cut her own strings and burn the entire stage to the ground. He was so confident in his deception, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he never saw the first unraveling thread. And it was a thread he had left dangling himself, a small, seemingly insignificant charge on a credit card statement. A charge for a gallery he thought his wife would never, ever have a reason to notice. Eleanor had always been the one to manage their household finances. It was a role Julian had delegated to her early in their marriage, not because he trusted her implicitly, but because he considered it tedious administrative work beneath his station. He gave her access to all their personal accounts, confident that her old money sensibilities would make her a responsible if uninspired steward of their domestic spending. It was a colossal miscalculation. He had mistaken her quiet diligence for a lack of curiosity. The first thread appeared on a Tuesday night. Julian was in Chicago for a merger, and Eleanor was in her study, the pool of light from her desk lamp, the only illumination in the dark penthouse. The baby was making its presence known with a persistent, gentle flutter, a secret conversation between mother and child. She was reviewing the monthly statement for their primary joint Amex account, a task she performed with meticulous care. She scanned the columns of figures Saks Fifth Avenue, the private chef's services, a donation to the Philharmonic, the usual rhythm of their opulent life. And then she saw it. A charge for $75,000. The vendor was listed as Monet Modern. Eleanor paused. She knew every major art dealer in the city and beyond. She had never heard of this one. It was a significant amount too large for a casual purchase. Julian hadn't mentioned acquiring a new piece. In fact, he'd recently complained about the art market being overvalued. Curiosity piqued. She opened her laptop and typed the gallery's name into the search bar. The website was sleek and aggressive, filled with the kind of abrasive conceptual art Julian had always professed to hate. He called it pretentious junk. He favored established masters' blue-chip assets. This was completely out of character. The gallery's owner was listed as Serafina Monet. A photo showed a striking woman with dark, challenging eyes standing beside a sculpture that looked like a tangle of rusted metal. An uneasy feeling, cold and sharp, pricked at Eleanor's heart. It was just a charge. It could be anything. A gift for a business associate. An investment he'd forgotten to mention. She tried to rationalize it, to push the suspicion away. But it was a loose thread on a perfect tapestry, and her fingers couldn't help but pull at it. Over the next few days, she started looking closer. She delved into accounts she hadn't reviewed in years, subsidiary accounts for his private holding companies, ones he used for discrete investments. She had to cross-reference tax IDs and wire transfer codes using the financial acumen her father, a savvy investor himself, had insisted she learn. What she found was a pattern. There wasn't just one charge. There were dozens stretching back over a year. Monthly wire transfers to a private account, all categorized under vague labels like consulting fees or acquisition services. There were charges from high-end jewelers. She'd never shopped at hotel bookings in cities where he had no business meetings, scheduled airline tickets for two that were never for her. And all of it seemed to orbit around one name, Serafina Monet. A charge for a floral arrangement delivered to the gallery's address. A payment to a luxury car service that listed the gallery as a frequent destination. The evidence was piling up, each discovery, a small, sharp cut. But it was all circumstantial. Financial data could be explained away. Julian was a master of plausible deniability. She knew she needed something irrefutable. She needed to see it. The decision to hire a private investigator felt like a betrayal of the woman she used to be, the woman who believed in privacy and trust. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone cold and clear-eyed. She found a discreet firm run by a former NYPD detective named Robert Costello, a man with a reputation for being thorough and invisible. She met him in a nondescript coffee shop in the West Village, a world away from her Fifth Avenue life. She was dressed down, wearing sunglasses and a simple trench coat. Mrs. Croft Costello, said his voice a low gravel. He didn't seem impressed by her name. "What can I do for you? I need you to follow my husband," she said, her own voice steady. Surprising herself with its lack of tremor. "I need to know where he goes and who he sees." She handed him a folder containing Julian's schedule for the next 2 weeks. A week later, a plain manila envelope arrived via courier. Eleanor took it into her sunroom, the one place that felt like hers, and sat down, her hands shaking. Inside were a dozen glossy 8x10 photographs. The first few were of Julian entering the Soho gallery, then photos of him and Serafina Monet laughing over lunch at an outdoor cafe, her hand on his, their heads close together in shared intimacy. Another showed them leaving a hotel not in Miami or Chicago, but the Greenwich Hotel, less than 3 miles from their own home. And then the final photograph, the one that shattered everything. It was taken at night through the large window of Serafina's loft apartment. Julian was standing behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist. He was kissing her neck, his eyes closed. Serafina was leaning back against him, a triumphant, possessive smile on her face as she looked at her reflection and, by extension, the camera's lens in the glass. It was a portrait of betrayal, stark and undeniable. Eleanor let the photo slip from her fingers and scatter across the floor. She didn't cry. The pain was too deep, too vast for tears. It was a hollow, echoing chasm that opened up inside her. Every shared memory, every anniversary, every hopeful moment of their 5-year marriage was instantly recontextualized as a lie. His impatience, his dismissiveness, his emotional distance. It all made sense now. He hadn't been busy. He had been absent. He was living another life, a life he preferred, a life he had paid for, with their shared money and her stolen trust. She sat there for a long time, the silence of the penthouse pressing in on her. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, to the gentle flutter that was now a steady, reassuring presence. She had been so naive. She had thought this child might be the glue that could repair the cracks in their marriage. Now she saw the truth. This child was not a bridge to him. This child was her anchor, her reason to escape. The hollow feeling began to recede, and in its place something new began to grow. It was not sorrow. It was not despair. It was a slow-burning, diamond-hard rage. He had called the news of their child efficient. He had reduced the most profound moment of her life to a line item on his legacy's balance sheet. He had stood in this very home, under this roof, and lied to her day after day, while spending their fortune on his secret life. She stood up and walked over to the scattered photographs. She picked up the final one, the image of Julian and Serafina in their embrace. She looked at his face lost in his selfish pleasure, and hers smug with victory. They both thought they had won. They thought she was a fool, a decorative, oblivious wife. They had underestimated her. Everyone had always underestimated her. That was about to become the most expensive mistake Julian Croft had ever made. Eleanor's grief was a crucible. It burned away the soft, forgiving parts of her and forged what was left into something sharp and unbreakable. The next morning, she did not confront Julian. There would be no tearful accusations, no screaming matches. That was the drama he would expect, a scene he could manage, manipulate, and ultimately dismiss. She was done playing scenes in his play. She was going to write her own ending. Her first call was not to a divorce lawyer. It was to Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a legend in certain circles of New York law, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. He wasn't a family law attorney who specialized in amicable splits. He was a shark, a specialist in forensic financial litigation and the weaponization of complex corporate contracts. He had a particular disdain for the brand of arrogant new money titans like Julian Croft, having once been ruined by one himself early in his career. He had since dedicated his life to dismantling them with surgical precision. They met in his office, a space that was the antithesis of Julian's world. It was old-paneled in dark wood and smelled of leather-bound books and quiet power. Marcus Thorne was a man in his late 50s, with piercing grey eyes and an unnerving stillness. He listened without interruption as Eleanor laid out her story, her voice a low, steady monotone. She concluded by placing the manila envelope of photographs on his polished desk. He glanced at the top photo, the one of the embrace, and pushed the envelope aside. He didn't need to see the rest. "Infidelity is predictable, Mrs. Croft," he said, his voice dry. "In and of itself, it's a weak negotiating position in this state. The emotional damage is immense, but the financial leverage is minimal. What else do you have?" This was the moment. Eleanor reached into her bag and retrieved a thick-bound document. "Our prenuptial agreement," she said, placing it on the desk. Marcus leaned forward. His interest finally piqued. He opened the document, his sharp eyes scanning the dense pages. Julian's lawyers, a team of aggressive corporate attorneys, had drafted it. It was on the surface an ironclad fortress designed to protect Julian's vast fortune, which was estimated at just over $2 billion. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, Eleanor would receive a one-time payment of $10 million a pittance, designed to buy her silence and a quick exit. Marcus read through it, his expression grim. "This is brutal, Mrs. Croft. It's designed to leave you with next to nothing." "Keep reading," Eleanor said calmly. Page 47. Article 12. Marcus flipped to the page. His eyes narrowed as he read the clause, and then he read it again. A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. He looked up at Eleanor, seeing her for the first time not as a victim, but as a fellow predator. "My God," he whispered, "the legacy clause." It was a piece of boilerplate language Julian's own lawyers had insisted on a standard edition for dynasty-building patriarchs. Julian, obsessed with his own legacy, had wanted to ensure the moral and financial integrity of the Croft bloodline. Article 12, the Fidelity and Family Progeny Clause, stated that the prenuptial agreement's primary terms would be rendered void under a specific set of circumstances. If the marriage produced a legitimate heir, and if Julian Croft was found to have engaged in marital infidelity that threatened the stability of the family unit during the gestation period of said heir, then an extraordinary measure would be triggered to protect the heir's birthright from the consequences of the father's moral instability, controlling interest in the Croft family trust. The entity that held the majority of his shares in Croft Enterprises, his real estate portfolio and his liquid assets, would be temporarily transferred to the mother to be held in stewardship until the child reached the age of 25. It was designed to protect a dynasty from a philandering father who might squander the family fortune on mistresses or illegitimate children. Julian had signed it with an arrogant flourish, so confident in his own infallibility and his ability to deceive that he'd seen it as a testament to his own patriarchal virtue. He never imagined it could be used against him. He saw it as a shield for his heir. He never saw that Eleanor would be the one to wield it as a sword. He signed it. Eleanor said, her voice like ice. He was so proud of it. He called it ensuring the future. "This isn't just a divorce filing, Mrs. Croft," Marcus said, his mind racing the thrill of the hunt in his eyes. "This is a corporate takeover, a coup d'etat. It's beautiful." For the next 4 weeks, they worked in absolute secrecy. Marcus assembled a ghost team of forensic accountants and banking specialists. They operated out of a secure, unmarked office in a different borough. Their mission was to map out Julian's entire financial empire, every shell corporation, every offshore account, every hidden asset. They found the holding company used to fund his affair, the one linked to the Black Amex. They traced the wire transfers to Serafina Monet. They built an impenetrable mountain of evidence linking his infidelity directly to his financial assets, satisfying the clause's requirements perfectly. While they worked, Eleanor played the most difficult role of her life. She was the perfect, glowing, expectant mother. She discussed nursery colors with Julian, feigned interest in his tedious stories about board meetings, and accompanied him to a charity dinner, smiling placidly for the cameras, her hand resting on her gently swelling abdomen. It was a masterful performance. The closer she got to the date, the more serene she appeared. Her calmness unnerved Julian, though he couldn't say why. He mistook her quiet resolve for contentment. The plan was a symphony of legal and financial maneuvers, timed to the minute. They couldn't just file a motion. The moment Julian was alerted, he would move his assets, hide them in a web of international accounts, so dense they'd spend years litigating. The transfer of control had to be instantaneous and absolute. Marcus Thorne prepared a series of documents. They weren't divorce papers. They were framed as a standard update to the Croft family trust, something a responsible father-to-be would do to streamline his estate for his coming child. There were dozens of pages of dense legalese, but buried deep within them were the trigger documents, the execution of the powers granted by Article 12, the irrevocable transfer of voting rights for his shares, and the legal appointment of Eleanor as the sole trustee. "He'll never read it," Eleanor stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Men like him never do. Marcus agreed. They see a stack of papers from their own lawyers, and all they see is their own power reflected back at them. They sign because they believe they are untouchable. The date was set. A Thursday. The day of the Met fundraiser he was so annoyed about. Eleanor knew he would be distracted his mind on the evening's boring pleasantries, and no doubt on whatever plans he had with Serafina for later. The day before, Eleanor went for her obstetrician appointment. She lay in the darkened room, the cool gel on her stomach, and watched the grainy black and white image on the screen. A tiny, perfect spine. A head, the frantic, powerful beat of a tiny heart. Tears streamed down her face, the first tears she had shed in a month. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of fierce, protective love. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered to the image on the screen. "You will never be just an asset. You will be safe. You will be free." She was no longer just escaping. She was building a fortress for her child. The day of the signing was a masterpiece of orchestrated banality. The weather was a placid, indifferent blue, the kind of autumn day in New York that feels full of promise. For Julian Croft, the promise was of an evening that would begin with a tedious but necessary appearance at the Met Gala, and end in the arms of Serafina Monet. For Eleanor, it was the promise of liberation. She woke early, a quiet hum of energy beneath her calm exterior. She chose her outfit with deliberate care, a simple but elegant cream-colored cashmere dress. It was modest, maternal, and utterly non-threatening. It was the costume for the final act of her performance as the dutiful Mrs. Croft. Julian was, as predicted, in a foul mood. He stood before his closet, a vast wood-paneled room larger than most New York apartments, scowling at his collection of tuxedos. "I hate this event," he grumbled, pulling one out. "All those preening peacocks and stale conversation. It's 4 hours I'll never get back." "It's important for the brand," Julian Eleanor said softly, walking in. "And you look so handsome when you're there." She adjusted the knot on the tie. He hadn't yet put on a small, wifely gesture that seemed to soothe his ego. I suppose he conceded. "Just make sure we leave the moment it's acceptable." "I have an early morning." It was his standard lie for a night with Serafina. "Of course, dear," she replied, her smile never wavering. Later that afternoon, at precisely 3:00 p.m., Eleanor walked into Julian's home office. It was his sanctuary, a room of dark leather-polished chrome and a singular, imposing desk that looked like a slab of black marble. He was on a conference call, pacing and barking orders. He gestured for her to wait, holding up one finger, annoyed at the interruption. Eleanor sat in one of the visitors' chairs, her leather portfolio clutched in her lap. She waited patiently for 10 minutes, projecting an aura of someone with nothing more important to do than await her husband's convenience. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against the cage of her chest. This was the most critical moment. If he balked, if he decided to read, if even a flicker of suspicion crossed his mind, the entire plan would collapse. Finally, he slammed the phone down. "What is it, Eleanor? I'm swamped." "I'm so sorry to bother you, darling." She began, her voice gentle and apologetic. "It's just, the lawyers sent these over. They said you needed to sign them before the end of the day." She opened her portfolio and laid the thick stack of documents on his desk. On top was a cover letter from the senior partner at his own trusted law firm, a man Julian had on a multi-million-dollar retainer. Marcus Thorne had brilliantly anticipated this, convincing a junior and deeply indebted associate at the firm to generate the letterhead and a boilerplate summary. The summary described the documents as The Croft Heir Provisionary Trust, an update to safeguard assets for your unborn child. Julian glanced at the cover letter, his eyes scanning the familiar logo. He grunted in acknowledgement. Right, the trust update, I'd forgotten. He picked up the stack, weighing it in his hand, his expression one of extreme impatience. He clearly had no intention of reading it. They're just formalities, mostly, Eleanor said, keeping her tone light and casual. Standard procedure for establishing the baby's inheritance, but they marked the pages you need to sign. She had, with Marcus's instruction, placed bright yellow. Sign. Here stickers on the appropriate signature lines, making it as easy and thoughtless as possible. She was treating him like a busy celebrity, signing autographs, not a billionaire signing away his empire. He flipped through the pages, his eyes glazing over at the dense blocks of text. He saw trust legalese asset schedules, appendixes. It looked exactly like every other tedious corporate document he signed a dozen times a week. His mind was already elsewhere on the speech he had to avoid at the gala on the reservation he'd made at a private club for him and Serafina at 11 p.m. He reached for his pen, a heavy custom Mont Blanc. Fine. Where do I sign? Eleanor stood and leaned over the desk, her scent a subtle familiar lavender filling the air. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the first yellow tab. Here. And here. He signed the first page, his signature, a sharp, arrogant slash of ink. She turned the page for him. And here. He signed again. With each stroke of the pen, a new wire in his vast financial web was severed from him and reconnected to her. The voting rights to his majority, stake in Croft Enterprises, the deeds to their properties in the Hamptons, Aspen, and St. Bart's, the control codes for his primary investment accounts, ///. As he signed the final page, the one that enacted the power of Article 12 and made all the other transfers legally binding and irrevocable, Eleanor felt a profound, dizzying sense of vertigo. It was done. The trap had been sprung. He was still the king, but he was sitting on a throne that no longer belonged to him. He pushed the stack of papers back across the desk towards her. There, all set. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for this dreadful party. He stood up already, dismissing the moment the papers and her from his mind. He was completely unaware that he had just executed his own financial demise. Thank you, Julian. Eleanor said, her voice impossibly serene. She gathered the documents, the ink still wet on his signature, and placed them carefully back into her portfolio. I'll have the courier send these back to the lawyers immediately. You go get ready. I'll see you downstairs in an hour. He nodded and walked out of the room without a backward glance. Eleanor stood alone in his office, the portfolio clutched to her chest. She looked around the room at the symbols of his power, the trophies of his conquests. They were hers now. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city sprawling below. It was no longer his kingdom that she was a prisoner in. It was her dominion, won not with brute force, but with the quiet, underestimated intelligence of a woman he had never bothered to truly see. A silent, seismic shift had just occurred, and the only person in the world who knew was the one he had wronged the most. The air in the restaurant was thick with the scent of money and ambition. Julian had chosen Aureole, a temple of modern American cuisine in the theater district, for his rendezvous with Serafina. It was a place for celebrating victories, a room where hushed billion-dollar deals were sealed over plates of meticulously crafted food. He had skipped out of the Met Gala at the earliest possible moment, leaving Eleanor to make his excuses, pleading a sudden migraine. The lie had rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. He sat across from Serafina in a plush, secluded booth, the city lights a dazzling backdrop. She was wearing a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark contrast to the sea of muted elegance she knew Eleanor would be wearing. "I hate that I had to see you with her tonight." Serafina pouted, swirling a ruby-red Cabernet in her glass, even from across the room, standing there all maternal and smug. "It's just for show, you know," that Julian said, reaching across the table to take her hand. His touch was proprietary, reassuring, a necessary evil. But the show is almost over. This was the lie he had been telling her for months, the carrot he dangled to ensure her compliance, the promise of a future where Eleanor was a footnote. "Is it Julian?" she asked, her dark eyes searching his. "Because that belly of hers is getting rather prominent," that he said, leaning in and lowering his voice, "is a complication, but it's also an opportunity. It changes the timeline, but the outcome is the same. You and me." To punctuate his promise, he signaled the sommelier. "Bring us the 2008 Dom Perignon Rosé," he ordered, not even glancing at the wine list. It was a gesture of casual, immense wealth. At that exact moment, 9:53 p.m., miles downtown in Marcus Thorne's wood-paneled office, Eleanor sat at a large conference table. The signed documents lay before her, now scanned and digitized. Marcus was on a secure line with a senior compliance officer at a private bank in Switzerland. 2 forensic accountants were poised over their laptops, ready to execute a complex series of wire transfers. "The authorization codes are authenticated," Marcus said, nodding to Eleanor. "We are greenlit. We go live on my mark." Eleanor took a deep, steadying breath. Her hand rested on her stomach. This was it. The point of no return. "Mark," she said, her voice clear and strong. Back at Aureole, the sommelier arrived with the champagne. The bottle, a pale, shimmering pink, was presented to Julian for his approval. He nodded curtly, and the cork was eased out with a soft, expensive sigh. As the first drops of pink champagne splashed into Serafina's crystal flute, a team of IT specialists contracted by Marcus executed a digital command. Julian Croft's biometric and password credentials for the Croft Enterprises servers were instantly revoked. The digital keys to his own kingdom were now invalid. The sommelier moved to Julian's glass. As the champagne filled it, a second command was executed. The irrevocable transfer of voting control of his majority shares, authorized by his own signature, was filed electronically with the company's board and the SEC. On paper, he was still the CEO. In reality, he was a figurehead who could be removed at any moment by the new majority shareholder, his wife. Julian raised his glass. The champagne fizzed, the tiny bubbles catching the light. He looked at Serafina, a woman he saw as his vibrant, exciting future. "A toast," he said, his voice resonant with self-satisfaction. "To new beginnings, to a future free of tedious obligations. To us." As their glasses clinked a high, clear note in the restaurant's murmur, the final series of transfers began. Liquid assets, hundreds of millions of dollars in cash stocks and bonds, were moved from accounts controlled by Julian into new trust accounts controlled solely by Eleanor. The titles for the properties were legally transferred. The credit lines he used to fund his lavish lifestyle, including the black Amex in Serafina's wallet, were frozen pending review by the new account controller. He took a long, satisfying sip of the champagne. It was crisp, complex, with notes of strawberry and smoke. It tasted to him like victory. He was a master of the universe, celebrating another successful manipulation, another perfectly managed duality. He was toasting his own brilliance, his power, his ability to have everything he wanted. He had no idea he was drinking to his own ruin. He was celebrating at his own wake and didn't even know he was the corpse, while he savored the taste of expensive wine and the company of his mistress. The empire he had built. The fortune that defined him was being systematically and legally dismantled in complete silence. The entire structure of his life had been demolished, and he was sitting in the rubble, admiring the view, completely oblivious to the fact that nothing he was looking at belonged to him anymore. The toast was a perfect final monument to his own spectacular arrogance. The first tremor of Julian's collapsed world came not as a roar, but as a whisper of digital embarrassment. After the lavish dinner, after more champagne and whispered promises, he reached for his wallet to pay the bill. He handed the waiter his personal Centurion card, the legendary black card that was his ultimate symbol of unlimited power. A few moments later, the waiter returned his expression, a careful mask of professional apology. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Croft. The card has been declined." Julian stared at him. "That's impossible." "Run it again." "We have, sir, 3 times. Perhaps there is another card you'd like to use." A flush of irritation crept up Julian's neck. He pulled out a platinum visa from another bank. "Try this one." The waiter returned again, his face even more pained. "My apologies, sir. This one as well." Serafina watched, her smile tightening. The glamour of the evening was evaporating under the harsh fluorescent light of a financial problem. Julian, flustered and furious, pulled out his phone to call the bank's private concierge line. He was put on hold. The triumphant master of the universe was now listening to tinny hold music like any other mortal. Finally, a nervous-sounding junior agent came on the line. "Mr. Croft." "Yes, I see the issue. There appears to be a hold on all your personal accounts. A directive was issued from the primary trustee." "I am the primary trustee," Julian hissed into the phone. "Our records show a change in trustee status, effective as of 9:53 p.m. this evening, sir. The new primary trustee is listed as Eleanor Vance Croft." The name hit him like a physical blow. It made no sense. It was a mistake, a clerical error. He ended the call, threw enough cash on the table to cover the bill, one of the few times he'd carried that much, and stormed out of the restaurant, Serafina trailing behind him, her expression now one of cold assessment. "What was that about Julian?" she asked as they stood on the curb, the city air suddenly chilly. "It's nothing. A bank error," he snapped, trying to access his Croft Enterprises corporate account on his phone to summon his driver. Access denied. He tried again. Invalid credentials. Panic, an emotion he hadn't felt since he was a young man clawing his way up, began to snake its way into his gut. He hailed a common yellow cab, a humiliation in itself. During the tense, silent ride to Fifth Avenue, he frantically tried to call his CFO, his lawyer, anyone. All his calls went straight to voicemail. It was as if he had been digitally excommunicated from his own life. When the cab pulled up to his building, the final devastating blow landed. He strode towards the grand entrance, but the doorman, a man who had greeted him by name for years, stepped forward to block his path, his face a picture of misery. "I'm sorry, Mr. Croft. I can't let you up." "What the hell are you talking about, Michael? I live here. My instructions are clear, sir. From the new primary leaseholder. Mrs. Croft, you're no longer listed as a resident." This was it. The moment the fog of denial was blasted away by the brutal light of reality. This wasn't an error. This was an attack. This was a coup. Serafina, who had been watching this all unfold, took a slow step back. The man she had attached herself to, the titan of industry, the font of unlimited resources, was being locked out of his own home. His power had vanished. She saw him not as a lover, but as a stock that had just crashed to zero. "Julian," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. I think I should go." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, hailed another cab, and disappeared into the New York night, taking his illusions of a shared future with her. Julian was left alone on the sidewalk, the city lights that once seemed to celebrate him, now mocking his powerlessness. Humiliated and enraged, he finally got a text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "Your belongings have been packed and sent to a storage unit in Queens. The address will be forwarded to you. Here is the number for a hotel I've booked for you for the next week. After that, you are on your own. A letter is waiting for you with the concierge. E." He stumbled into the lobby where the concierge silently handed him a thick cream-colored envelope bearing the elegant VC monogram. He tore it open. Inset in Eleanor's perfect looping script was a multi-page letter. It was not emotional or angry. It was a calm, detailed, and devastating summary of his ruin. It outlined his infidelity, referencing dates and locations from the private investigator's report. It explained in clear, simple terms the function of Article 12 of their prenuptial agreement, the clause he had never bothered to read. It informed him that she had assumed full control of the Croft family trust, and by extension, the company and all their assets, to protect the birthright of their unborn child from a father of compromised judgment. The letter ended with a final soul-crushing paragraph. "You once told me that my pregnancy was efficient and good for the brand. You were right. It has proven to be the most efficient business transaction of my life. You saw our child as an heir to your empire. Instead, this child has become the instrument of my liberation and your downfall. You underestimated me, Julian. You saw me as another beautiful object you owned. You will find that of all your acquisitions, I was the only one that had a mind of its own. Do not try to contact me. All future correspondence will be through our lawyers, or rather, my lawyers, and whomever you can afford to hire." He crumpled the letter in his fist, his body trembling with a rage so profound it left him breathless. He had been utterly, completely, and perfectly defeated. He had been dismantled not by a corporate rival or a market crash, but by the quiet, unassuming woman he had relegated to the background of his life. She had used his own arrogance, his own legal documents, and his own child against him in a maneuver so brilliant and ruthless it was something he would have admired in an enemy. He looked up through the glass doors of the lobby up at the penthouse where the lights were on. He could almost imagine her standing there, a hand on her stomach, looking down at him. Eleanor Vance Croft, the curator of his life, had just curated his spectacular destruction. He had nothing left but the expensive clothes on his back and the bitter taste of champagne in his mouth. He had toasted his future, never realizing he was already a ghost of the past. And so Julian Croft's world ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet signature and the pop of a champagne cork. It's a chilling reminder that the greatest threats often come not from our declared enemies, but from the people we underestimate the most. Eleanor's story is one of incredible strength, a transformation from a silent partner into the architect of her own justice. It leaves us with a powerful question. Is this a story of cold-hearted revenge, Or is it a story of radical self-preservation? Was Eleanor's coup a masterclass in karma, or a cautionary tale about the devastating power of secrets? Julian lost a fortune, but in the end what he truly lost was the respect and love of a woman who was worth more than his entire empire. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story of betrayal and brilliant revenge as captivating as we did, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic karma, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next real-life drama we uncover. Have you ever wondered what lies behind the perfect facade of a power couple? The lavish parties, the penthouse views, the adoring smiles for the camera. Amelia Sterling thought she had it all. A brilliant career, a loving husband who was a self-made millionaire, and their first child on the way. She was living a dream. But in one night, that dream would curdle into a waking nightmare. Her husband, the man she adored, would not only discard her for his younger, more ambitious mistress, but would do so with a cruelty designed to leave her with absolutely nothing. He thought he was closing a chapter, burying a mistake. He had no idea he was unleashing a force he couldn't possibly comprehend. The city lights of New York glittered below the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Park Avenue penthouse, a sprawling tapestry of diamonds scattered on black velvet. Amelia Sterling traced the rim of her water glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips. The crystal chimed softly as she set it down on the polished mahogany of the dining table, a table set for a celebration that felt increasingly hollow. At 29, she was a successful architect, a partner at a boutique firm, but her greatest project, the one she cherished most, was the life she was building with her husband, Damien Thorne. Damien was a force of nature. At 35, he had built his private equity firm, Thorne Capital Investments, from the ground up, earning a reputation for his ruthless business acumen and devastating charm. They had met at a charity gala 4 years ago, a whirlwind romance that saw them married within a year. He was her rock, her champion, the man who saw the fire in her soul. Or so she had believed. Tonight was supposed to be special. She had cooked his favorite meal, seared scallops, with a lemon butter sauce, followed by a perfectly rare filet mignon. A bottle of sparkling cider was chilling for her, while his favorite bottle of a 1998 Chateau Margaux was breathing on the counter. She had news, the kind of news that transforms a couple into a family. She smoothed a hand over her stomach, where a secret fluttered a life barely the size of a blueberry. The click of the key in the lock finally came at 9:45 p.m. Damien strode in his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, immaculate, not a single silver blonde hair out of place. He looked like he'd stepped off the cover of Forbes, which ironically he had done 2 months prior. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice smooth but distant. He loosened his silk tie, his blue eyes sweeping over the meticulously set table without a flicker of warmth. "Big deal brewing with the Sterling-Nash merger. You know how it is." Of course, Amelia smiled, pushing aside the small prick of disappointment. "Everything is still warm. I was just so excited to talk to you." He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory, dry gesture that felt more like a social obligation than an act of affection. For the past few months, these little chills had been creeping into their marriage. Late nights became all-nighters. Business trips were extended with little explanation. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now perpetually in his pocket or face down on his desk. When she tried to touch him, he would often pull away, murmuring about stress or fatigue. She had told herself it was the pressure of his work. He was building an empire, and empires required sacrifice. She had to be the supportive wife, the calm harbor in his turbulent world. "Sit," she urged, her voice bright. "I have something wonderful to tell you." He sat, allowing her to serve him. He ate mechanically, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder, lost in a world of figures and projections she couldn't enter. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable, so he began finally placing his fork down with a decisive click. "We need to talk." Amelia's heart leaped. "I know me first." She couldn't contain it any longer. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Damien," she began, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "We're pregnant. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." She waited for the explosion of joy, for him to leap up and swing her around, for the cold distance in his eyes to melt away, replaced by the warmth she had fallen in love with. Instead, his face remained a mask of polished stone. He slowly, deliberately removed his hand from under hers. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. It was a void, sucking all the air and light from the room. "Amelia," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "That's a complication." The word hit her like a physical blow. "A complication. Damien, it's a baby. Our baby. This is what we've always talked about." "Plans change," he stated, his gaze finally meeting hers. And in their depths, she saw not stress or fatigue, but a chilling reptilian coldness. "I want a divorce." The world tilted on its axis, the glittering city outside blurred into a smear of meaningless lights. "What a divorce? You're joking." "This is a joke." Her laugh was a brittle, broken sound. "I have never been more serious in my life," he said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of detached composure. "I'm in love with someone else." The confession was delivered with the same casual tone he might use to discuss the stock market. Each word was a precision strike designed to inflict maximum damage. "Who?" The question was a raw whisper. "Serafina Dubois. She's an associate in my M&A department. She understands my world, my ambition." He said her name as if it were a rare vintage something precious and refined. Amelia's mind reeled. Serafina, a stunning, fiercely intelligent woman in her mid-20s she'd met at a company Christmas party. Amelia had even commented to Damien how bright she was. The memory was now coated in acid. How long, she asked, her voice trembling. 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months of stolen weekends, feigned business trips, and touches that belonged to her. The nausea that rose in her throat had nothing to do with her pregnancy. "You're leaving me, while I'm pregnant with your child." For her. The absurdity, the sheer unadulterated cruelty of it, was incomprehensible. "The pregnancy is unfortunate timing." "I'll admit," he said, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features, "but it doesn't change the facts. This marriage is over. My lawyers will be in touch with you tomorrow. I expect you to be cooperative." "Cooperative?" She choked out a raw, hysterical anger, beginning to burn through the shock. "You want me to be cooperative? You've been cheating on me for half a year, and you're throwing me away like a bad investment. Don't be so dramatic, Amelia." he sighed, standing up and straightening his tie. It was a gesture of finality of dismissal. It's just business, a merger that didn't work out. I'll be staying at the club tonight. I suggest you have your things packed by the end of the week. Serafina will be moving in. He turned to leave his back straight, his shoulders unburdened by the life he was shattering. "Damien, wait!" she cried, stumbling to her feet. "The baby. This is your child." He paused at the doorway, turning his head slightly. The cold blue of his eyes pinned her in place. "Prove it." He said the words dripping with venom. "As far as I'm concerned, that's your problem now. My lawyers will handle the details of the prenuptial agreement. You'll find it's quite ironclad." And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing the tomb of their marriage. Amelia stood alone in the center of the room, the scent of the uneaten feast mingling with the metallic tang of betrayal. Her hand went to her stomach, a protective, instinctual gesture. She wasn't just losing her husband, her home, her future. He was trying to take her identity, her dignity, and even the legitimacy of their unborn child. The glittering cage had become a prison, and its door had just been slammed shut, leaving her trapped in the ruins of a life she no longer recognized. The fight for her survival and her child's had just begun. The following days bled into a grey, featureless blur of grief and humiliation. The world that had once felt so vibrant and full of promise had been reduced to the sterile, intimidating confines of a lawyer's office. Damien's legal team from the prestigious firm of Gable and Thorne. Legal moved with the swift, merciless efficiency of sharks scenting blood. They were not there to negotiate. They were there to dictate the terms of her surrender. Amelia sat opposite a man named Mr. Peterson, a senior partner with a face like sculpted granite and eyes that held no sympathy. Her own lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed woman named Carol, recommended by a friend, looked increasingly distressed as Peterson laid out the terms. As per the prenuptial agreement signed by Ms. Sterling on June 12, 2021. Peterson droned his voice, a monotonous weapon in the event of a dissolution of the marriage. She is entitled to a one-time payment of $50,000 and is required to vacate any and all properties owned by Mr. Thorne within 7 days of the filing. $50,000? Carol interjected, her voice sharp. That's insulting. They've been married for 4 years. Amelia gave up a promotion at her firm to support Mr. Thorne's social and business obligations. Peterson offered a thin, dismissive smile. A choice she made freely. The document is airtight. Mr. Thorne has also graciously offered to cover her moving expenses up to $2,000. The word graciously hung in the air, a monument to Damien's cruelty. He was worth hundreds of millions. This wasn't a settlement. It was a final slap in the face. And the child Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her hand rested protectively on her still flat stomach. Peterson adjusted his glasses, his gaze cold. Mr. Thorne contests the paternity. He is willing to submit to a DNA test after the child is born. Until such time, he will make no provisions. If he is proven to be the father, he will fulfill his minimum legal obligations as determined by the state. Nothing more. The public clinical denial of their child was a new, deeper level of pain. It was a calculated move to isolate and shame her. He was painting her as a liar, a gold digger, a woman of questionable morals. The narrative was being written, and she was its villain. The next few days were a frantic, tear-filled scramble. Packaged boxes, once filled with the promise of a shared future, now littered the pristine marble floors of the penthouse. Each object was a memory, a ghost. The vase they bought in Tuscany. The first edition book of poetry he'd given her on their first anniversary. The silver picture frame holding a photo of them on their wedding day, two smiling strangers from another lifetime. She packed it all, a curator of her own heartbreak. Her best friend, Chloe Vance, was her savior. A whirlwind of practical energy and righteous fury, Chloe arrived with boxes, packing tape, and a bottle of non-alcoholic wine. The man is a sociopath, Amelia, a genuine grade A monster, Chloe declared expertly, wrapping a set of wine glasses in newspaper, and her Serafina Dubois. I looked her up, climbed the corporate ladder on her back from what I hear. This isn't love. It's a hostile takeover of your life. Amelia could only nod, her throat thick with unshed tears. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. The news had already started to leak among their social circle. The whispers followed her like a shadow. "Did you hear about the Thorns?" He left her. Apparently she trapped him with a pregnancy. He's with that brilliant girl from his office now. Damien and Serafina controlled the story, and they were painting her as unhinged and desperate. The final day in the penthouse was the worst. The movers had taken the last of her boxes. The vast apartment echoed with emptiness. As she was about to leave, the elevator doors opened, and Serafina stepped out holding a designer key fob. She was dressed in a sleek white power suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She looked like she belonged there. "Amelia," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I was hoping I wouldn't run into you. This must be so difficult." Amelia clutched her purse, her knuckles white. "Get out of my way, Serafina." Serafina's smile was a slash of crimson lipstick. "I just wanted to say I'm truly sorry for your situation. But you can't stand in the way of progress. Damien needs a partner, not a project. He's destined for greatness, and he can't be held back by domestic trivialities." The condescension was breathtaking. Trivialities. "You mean his child?" Serafina waved a dismissive hand, a large diamond flashing on her ring finger, a ring Amelia had never seen before. "Damien has his doubts, and frankly your emotional state right now doesn't exactly inspire confidence. I'll be redecorating, of course. This place is a little dated. Too much soft personal sentiment. It needs a cleaner, more modern aesthetic." It was a final, brutal assertion of dominance. Serafina wasn't just taking her husband. She was erasing every trace of her existence. Amelia walked out without another word. Her dignity, the only thing she had left to cling to. She moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village that Chloe had helped her find. The contrast was jarring. The constant sound of swans replaced the serene quiet of the penthouse. The view was of a brick wall instead of the city skyline. The $50,000 after paying her lawyer and the first few months' rent felt like a pittance, a countdown timer to destitution. She tried to find work, but her focus was shattered. Morning sickness was a constant draining companion. The stress was taking its toll. One afternoon, while scrolling through a financial news site, a headline caught her eye. "Thorn. Capital announces record Q3 profits amid Sterling Nash acquisition." Below the headline was a picture of Damien and Serafina beaming at a press conference. They were the city's new golden couple. He looked happier, more powerful than she had ever seen him. That was when she truly hit rock bottom. Sitting on the floor of her cramped, unfamiliar apartment, surrounded by boxes she had no energy to unpack. Amelia Sterling finally allowed herself to break. The sobs came in racking, gut-wrenching waves for her lost love, for her stolen future, for the innocent child growing inside her, who was already being forced to pay the price for its father's sins. She was alone, pregnant, and on the verge of being penniless in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Damien hadn't just divorced her. He had tried to annihilate her. And as she lay there, the darkness closing in, she felt utterly and completely defeated. There was no way out. There was no hope left. The weeks that followed were a monotonous cycle of survival. Amelia forced herself to eat for the baby's sake, bland crackers and ginger ale becoming her staples. She unpacked her boxes, turning the small apartment into a semblance of a home, though it felt more like a temporary shelter. Her savings dwindled with alarming speed. She took on freelance architectural drafting projects online, working late into the night, her eyes burning from the screen, just to make enough to cover her bills. The world of galas, charity events, and bespoke suits felt like a dream she'd once had. Her reality was now overdue notices and the constant gnawing anxiety of impending poverty. Chloe remained her steadfast anchor. She'd bring groceries, force Amelia to go for walks in Washington Square Park, and rail against Damien with a ferocity that was both terrifying and comforting. You need to sue him for emotional distress, defamation, something, Chloe insisted one evening over takeout pizza. On what grounds? And with what money? Amelia replied, her voice weary. He has a legal army. I have Carol, who he could bury in paperwork before lunchtime. He's made it clear, Chloe. He wants me gone, and he has the power to make it happen. Her spirit was eroded. The fight had gone out of her. Her focus was singular. Get through the next 9 months, have a healthy baby, and then figure out how to be a single mother with no safety net. It was on a dreary Tuesday in late November, the city air crisp with the promise of a cold winter, that the letter arrived. It was innocuous at first, just another piece of mail in the mountain of bills and junk circulars. But this one was different. The envelope was thick, heavy, cream-colored cardstock with an elegant embossed return address in the corner, Finch and Sterling Solicitors. 12. Old Square, Lincoln's Inn, London, Finch and Sterling. The name sent a strange, faint hum through her. Sterling was her maiden name. She'd always been told her parents had died in a car crash when she was an infant, leaving her with no known relatives. She was raised in the foster care system until she was adopted by a kind middle-class couple in Connecticut who had since passed away. She had no family. She had no connection to a prestigious London law firm. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Or perhaps in some bizarre twist, it was from a distant relative of her adoptive parents. With trembling fingers, she slit open the envelope. The letter inside was typed on matching letterhead, the language formal and precise. Dear Miss Amelia Sterling, it is with regret that we must inform you of the passing of your maternal grandfather, Mr. Arthur Kensington, on November 15th. We have been attempting to locate you for some time. As the executor of Mr. Kensington's estate, it is my duty to inform you that you are named as the primary beneficiary in his last will and testament. It is imperative that you contact our offices at your earliest convenience to arrange a meeting either in person in London or via a secure video conference to discuss the details of the estate and the execution of the will. Please accept our sincerest condolences for your loss. Yours faithfully, Alistair Finch, Senior Partner. Finch and Sterling. Amelia read the letter 3 times, The words seemed to swim before her eyes, refusing to make sense. Maternal grandfather, Arthur Kensington. The name meant nothing to her. She had no maternal grandfather. Her mother, according to the scant records she'd seen, was an orphan herself. This had to be a cruel, elaborate prank, or worse, a scam. Yet there was an undeniable weight of authenticity to it. The thick paper, the London address, the formal tone. She quickly searched for Finch and Sterling online. The firm was not just real. It was one of London's oldest and most respected law firms, specializing in estate planning for high net worth individuals for over 2 centuries. Then she typed Arthur Kensington. The results stole her breath. Article after article appeared from publications like the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and The Economist. Arthur Kensington wasn't just some wealthy old man. He was a titan. He was the reclusive, legendary founder and chairman of Kensington Global Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with interests in shipping, real estate technology, and pharmaceuticals. He was a kingmaker in global finance, a name whispered with awe and reverence in boardrooms from London to Tokyo. Photographs showed a stern, imposing man with piercing grey eyes and a mane of white hair, even in his old age. And this man was supposedly her grandfather. The world, which had already been turned upside down, once felt like it was dissolving into sheer fantasy. It was impossible. Her life was this small apartment, this dwindling bank account, this unborn child whose father denied its existence. Her life was not multi-billion-dollar conglomerates and London solicitors. She called Chloe immediately, her voice a frantic, breathless mess as she read the letter aloud. Whoa. Slow down, Chloe said. Arthur Kensington. Arthur Kensington. Amelia. This has to be a scam. Someone found your name and is trying to get your personal information. But the law firm is real, Chloe. And they're not asking for my bank details. They're asking for a meeting. And look at the firm's name. Finch and Sterling, my maiden name. A silence fell on the other end of the line. Okay, Chloe said slowly. That is weird. Really weird. What do I do? You proceed with extreme caution. Chloe advised, her lawyerly instincts kicking in. Do not give them any personal information. No social security number. No bank accounts. Nothing. Set up the video conference. Let them talk. I'll be right there with you on mute, listening to every word. If it's a scam, we'll shut it down. But Amelia, what if it's real? If this is actually real? Everything is about to change. Amelia ended the call, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked around her small apartment at the peeling paint on the windowsill and the worn-out thrift store armchair. She then looked back at the letter, at the name Arthur Kensington, and the vast, dizzying chasm between those two realities. For the first time in months, a feeling other than grief or fear barked within her. It was a terrifying, fragile flicker of something she hadn't felt since Damien walked out that door. Hope. It was a dangerous, seductive feeling, but she couldn't help but cling to it. With nothing left to lose, she took a deep breath and drafted an email to Mr. Pessimist, Alistair Finch, a single keystroke that would either expose a cruel hoax or unlock a past she never knew she had. The video conference was scheduled for 2 days later. Amelia set up her laptop on the small dining table, her hands slick with nervous perspiration. Chloe sat beside her, a legal pad in her lap, and a skeptical expression on her face. The screen flickered to life, revealing a man who perfectly matched the gravitas of his firm's letterhead. Alistair Finch appeared to be in his late 60s, with kind, discerning eyes behind a pair of silver-rimmed spectacles and a neatly trimmed gorse-grey beard. He sat in what was clearly a wood-panelled office with leather-bound books lining the walls behind him. "Miss Sterling, thank you for making the time to speak with me." He began, his voice a calm, cultured baritone that carried the weight of English authority. "I am Alistair Finch, and please allow me again to offer my condolences on the passing of your grandfather, Mr. Finch." Amelia started, her voice steadier than she expected. "I appreciate you reaching out, but I have to be honest. I believe there has been a mistake. My parents died when I was a baby. I was raised in the foster system. I have no known family, certainly not a grandfather named Arthur Kensington." Mr. Finch listened patiently, his hands steepled on the desk before him. When she finished, he gave a sad, knowing nod. "There has been no mistake, Miss Sterling," he said gently. "The story you were told was incomplete. It was a fabrication designed to protect you." He then began to unravel the story of her life, a story so profoundly different from the one she knew that it felt like he was describing a stranger. Her mother was not an orphan. Her name was Elizabeth Sterling, and she was Arthur Kensington's only child, his beloved daughter. "Your mother was a brilliant, free-spirited woman," Finch explained, his expression softening with memory. "But she was also headstrong. She fell in love with the man your grandfather deeply disapproved of, an American journalist, a war correspondent named Semtu David. Arthur saw him as a reckless fortune hunter, unworthy of his daughter and the Kensington legacy. He painted a picture of a classic family feud, an immovable, powerful patriarch, and a daughter determined to choose love over duty. Elizabeth and David eloped and moved to the United States, severing all ties with Arthur. For years he heard nothing, his pride and anger creating a chasm between them. Then, a little over 28 years ago, he received a letter from your father." Finch continued. "Elizabeth had given birth to a daughter, you. David wrote to Arthur, hoping the birth of his grandchild would thaw his heart and lead to a reconciliation. But Arthur, in his stubbornness, never replied. A few months later, tragedy struck. Elizabeth and David were covering a story in a conflict zone in South America when they were caught in the crossfire. They were killed instantly. Amelia felt a wave of dizziness. This wasn't a car crash. Her parents were heroes journalists who died in the line of duty. Arthur was devastated, Finch said, his voice dropping. The guilt consumed him. He had lost his only child because of his pride. He immediately flew to the States to find you, his only living connection to his daughter. But when he arrived, you were gone. The local authorities, seeing no next of kin, had already placed you into the state's foster care system, and due to privacy laws and sealed records, even with all his wealth and influence, he hit a wall. You had vanished. For years, Arthur Kensington had employed the best private investigators in the world to find his lost granddaughter. It became his life's obsession. He built his global empire, but it was a hollow kingdom without his heir. It was only 3 years ago that an investigator finally had a breakthrough, tracing a sealed adoption record to a couple in Connecticut, and from there to an architect in New York named Amelia Sterling. He wanted to contact you immediately, Finch said. But he saw you were married, seemingly happy and successful. He was an old man filled with regret. He feared that his sudden appearance would disrupt your life, that you would hate him for the years of silence. He chose to watch you from a distance, gathering every piece of news about you he could. He was immensely proud of your career, of the woman you had become. Tears were streaming freely down Amelia's face now. Chloe reached over and squeezed her hand, her own eyes wide with shock. In his final years, his health failing, he amended his will, Finch concluded. He left everything to you. He saw it not as a gift, but as a long overdue apology. His legacy, he wrote in a letter he left for you, was not his company, but his daughter's child. Finch held up a document to the camera. Ms. Sterling, as the sole heir of Arthur Kensington, you are the new majority shareholder and controlling owner of Kensington Global Holdings and all its subsidiary assets. The company is currently valued conservatively at approximately $47 billion. The number was so astronomical, so utterly beyond the realm of comprehension, that Amelia almost laughed. $47 billion. Just last week, she had been agonizing over a $300 electricity bill. Chloe let out a low whistle beside her. There are, of course, extensive properties trusts and personal effects, Finch added, as if this were an afterthought. A manor in the English countryside, a villa in Lake Como, a collection of modern art. The list is quite extensive. The reality of it began to sink in a seismic shock that rearranged her entire understanding of who she was. She wasn't an orphan. She was a Kensington. She came from a line of immense power and wealth. The loneliness that had been a constant companion her entire life was suddenly replaced by the ghost of a family she never knew she had. I don't know what to say, Amelia stammered, wiping her eyes. There is nothing you need to say right now, my dear Finch said, his tone paternal. This is a great deal to process. We have a team ready to assist you with everything from the legal transition to simply answering your questions. The first step would be for you to come to London to sign the necessary documents and formally assume your position. The call ended a few minutes later, with promises to arrange travel and further correspondence. Amelia closed the laptop, and the tiny apartment fell silent. Chloe finally broke the silence. Okay. So, you're basically a princess. Amelia shook her head, a dazed, watery smile on her face. I don't even know what I am. Then a new feeling began to crystallize through the shock and grief. It was a cold, hard resolve. She thought of Damien and his petty $50,000 settlement. She thought of Serafina, redecorating her home, erasing her. She thought of their smug faces in the news, celebrating a victory built on her destruction. They thought they had crushed Amelia Sterling, the struggling architect from a humble background. They had no idea who she really was. Damien had called their unborn child a complication and a problem. He had dismissed her as a liability. But now she was not a liability. She was a Kensington. And this child, his child, was the heir to a fortune that dwarfed his own 1,000 times over. He had wanted to erase her. But she was about to become the one thing he could never ignore. The power had shifted. The game had changed, and Amelia Sterling was just beginning to understand the rules. The flight to London was a surreal dream. Amelia flew first class on a British Airways flight, a ticket arranged by Mr. Finch's office. She spent the 7-hour journey in a state of suspended disbelief, the gentle hum of the engines, a backdrop to the tectonic plates shifting in her life. She was no longer Amelia, the discarded wife. She was Amelia Sterling Kensington, the heiress to a global empire. The name felt foreign on her tongue, a costume she had yet to grow into. London was grey and majestic. A black Bentley was waiting for her at Heathrow, the driver holding a discreet sign with her name. He whisked her away to the Connaught in Mayfair, where a suite, not a room, an entire suite larger than her Greenwich Village apartment, had been prepared for her. It was a world of hushed luxury, of impeccable service and quiet deference. It was the world she was born into, and the one she was now belatedly claiming. The next day she met Alistair Finch at the historic offices of Finch and Sterling. He guided her through a labyrinth of legal documents, each signature another step into her new reality. She was now the chairwoman of Kensington Global Holdings. The board of directors, a collection of grizzled, powerful men who had been loyal to her grandfather for decades, was awaiting her instruction. They will be skeptical at first. Finch warned her gently over tea in his office after the signings were complete. You are young, you are a woman, and you are an unknown quantity. They will test you. Let them, Amelia said, a newfound steel in her voice. The shy, heartbroken woman who had fled New York seemed a lifetime away. Grief and shock had been alchemized into a cold, diamond-hard purpose. My grandfather built an empire. I will not be the one to let it crumble. For the next 2 months, Amelia immersed herself in a brutal, self-imposed crash course. She lived and breathed Kensington Global Holdings. She devoured decades of financial reports, market analyses, and strategic plans. She met with every department head, from the grizzled chief of their shipping division to the wunderkind CEO of their new tech venture fund. She didn't pretend to be an expert. She listened, she learned, and she asked sharp, insightful questions that betrayed her architect's mind, a mind trained to see structure, weakness, and potential in complex systems. Slowly she won their respect. They saw not a flighty heiress, but a focused, intelligent, and fiercely determined leader. She wasn't her grandfather. She was quieter, more collaborative, but she possessed his iron will. She also began to quietly assemble her own personal team. She hired a formidable new CFO, a woman named Genevieve Croft, known for her aggressive and brilliant financial strategies. She put a top-tier corporate security firm on retainer, and she established a new private investment vehicle, a subsidiary holding company in Delaware, registered under the anonymous name A.S. Holdings. No one knew what it was for, but no one dared to question her. As her belly swelled with the growing life inside her, so did her power and confidence. The city of London, initially intimidating, began to feel like home. She moved into her grandfather's sprawling countryside manor in the Cotswolds, a place of quiet beauty and history. It was there, in a beautiful room overlooking a garden that had been tended for centuries, that she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named her Lily Elizabeth Kensington. Holding her daughter for the first time, Amelia felt the last vestiges of the old, her fall away. This tiny, perfect creature was everything. She was the reason for this fight. She was the future of the Kensington legacy. The thought of Damien, who had so callously denied this child, filled her not with sadness but with a glacial rage. While she was on a brief maternity leave, she stayed connected, running the empire from the manor. One afternoon, while reviewing market intelligence reports with Genevieve Croft via video call, a familiar name appeared: Thorn Capital Investments. They're overextended, Genevieve noted, pointing to a series of charts on the screen. Damien Thorn made a massive, highly leveraged play for the Sterling-Nash merger. He staked the company's future on it. It paid off in the short term, but it's left his firm vulnerable. His debt-to-equity ratio is precarious. A significant dip in the market, or a failure in one of his other key investments, could trigger a cascade. Amelia leaned closer to the screen, her heart beating a little faster. What kind of failure? Genevieve's smile was sharp. Thorn Capital is the primary backer for a major new biotech firm, Innovate Gen Pharmaceuticals. They've poured hundreds of millions into it. Innovate Gen's entire valuation is based on the upcoming FDA approval of a new Alzheimer's drug, Serafrin 9. If that drug fails its Phase 3 trials, Innovate Gen will be worthless overnight. Thorn Capital's stock would plummet. They'd be ripe for a hostile takeover. Amelia looked at Genevieve, a silent understanding passing between them. Kensington's pharmaceutical division, Amelia said slowly. Our R&D is second to none. Do we have anything that competes with Serafrin 9? Genevieve's smile widened. Funny you should ask. We have a drug called Cognisil. Superior efficacy, fewer side effects. We fast-tracked the trials 6 months ago on your grandfather's last directive. The final results are due any day now. If we get approval first and push it to market, we could make Serafrin 9 completely obsolete before it even launches. The pieces clicked into place. The path forward was suddenly brutally clear. This wasn't just about the market anymore. This was about justice. Genevieve Amelia said, her voice calm and steady. I want you to use AS Holdings. Start quietly acquiring Thorn Capital's debt. Buy it from their lenders. Become their primary creditor. And pull every string we have at the FDA. I want Cognisil's approval expedited. Every resource of Kensington Global is to be focused on this. Consider it done, Genevieve replied, a glint in her eye. She knew this wasn't just business. Amelia ended the call and walked over to the bassinet where Lily was sleeping peacefully. She gently stroked her daughter's soft cheek. He thought we were a complication, she whispered. He thought he could throw us away and forget we ever existed. But we're going to be the foundation of his ruin. He built his empire on ruthlessness. I'll build ours on the ashes of his. The phoenix had risen, and now it was ready to hunt. The next 3 months were a masterclass in corporate warfare, orchestrated with the precision of a seasoned general. From her command center in London, Amelia directed the multi-pronged assault on Damien Thorne's empire. It was a silent, invisible attack, a web being woven around him that he couldn't see until it was too late. Step 1 was the pharmaceutical play. Kensington's lobbying power in Washington, combined with Cognisil's legitimately superior trial data, worked wonders. The FDA granted approval with a speed that made headlines in the medical world. The day Kensington Global announced the immediate market release of Cognisil shares in Innovate Gen Pharmaceuticals plummeted by 70%. Damien's flagship investment was suddenly toxic. Step 2 was the debt. AS Holdings, Amelia's anonymous shell corporation, had spent weeks buying up Thorn Capital's debt from various investment banks. The banks were happy to offload the risk, especially with the Innovate Gen news rattling the market. In the span of a month, Amelia's holding company became the single largest creditor to her ex-husband's firm. She owned him. Step 3 was the market pressure. Using Kensington's vast financial resources, Genevieve Croft initiated a series of strategic short sells against Thorn Capital's stock. Rumors expertly planted in key financial news outlets began to circulate about the firm's instability and over-leveraged position. The stock, already weakened, began to hemorrhage value. In his New York office, Damien Thorne was in a state of escalating panic. His world was collapsing. The Sterling-Nash merger, once his crowning achievement, was now an anchor dragging him under. His lenders were calling, demanding more collateral. His investors were fleeing. He worked around the clock, his famous charm curdling into raw, desperate anger. He lashed out at his staff, at his partners, and most of all, at Serafina. "This is your fault," he snarled at her one night, throwing a crystal glass against the wall of the penthouse she had so proudly redecorated. "You were supposed to be my partner, the brilliant mind. You told me the Innovate Gen play was a sure thing. How could I have known Kensington would come out of nowhere with a miracle drug?" She shot back, her composure finally cracking under the strain. "This isn't my fault, Damien. This is your ego. You bet the entire company on one roll of the dice. Their dream life was imploding. The lavish parties stopped. The fawning press fell silent. The foundation of their relationship, power, success, and money was crumbling, revealing the ugly transactional reality beneath. The final blow came on a crisp spring morning. Damien was in an emergency board meeting trying to stave off a mutiny when his secretary burst in, her face pale. "So you need to see this. It's on every financial network." The television screen showed the breaking news banner. "Mysterious AS Holdings initiates hostile takeover of Thorn Capital." Damien stared dumbfounded. "Who the hell is AS Holdings?" he roared. No one knew. They were a ghost, a phantom entity that had seemingly appeared from nowhere to devour his company. A few hours later, the answer arrived in the form of a legal summons. AS Holdings was calling in its debt, all of it, immediately. Failure to pay would result in the forfeiture of the company's controlling shares, which had been pledged as collateral. It was a checkmate. Thorn Capital was finished. The summons requested a meeting with the principal of AS Holdings to negotiate the terms of the surrender. Damien, a broken and defeated man, agreed. He had to know who had so masterfully destroyed him. He walked into the designated boardroom at the offices of a neutral law firm, expecting to see a rival he knew, Victor Beaumont, of Beaumont Industries, or some other corporate raider. Instead, the room was empty except for a single woman standing by the window, looking out over the city. She was impeccably dressed in a dark blue Armani power suit, her blonde hair cut in a chic, sophisticated bob. She looked poised, confident, and powerful. When she turned around, Damien's blood ran cold. It was Amelia. But it wasn't the Amelia he knew. The soft, loving woman he had discarded was gone. In her place stood a queen, her eyes holding not a trace of love or pain, only the chill of absolute victory. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice cracking. What is this? What are you doing here, negotiating the terms of your surrender?" she said, her voice even and cool. She gestured to the folder on the table. AS Holdings. As in Amelia Sterling. It's my company. Or rather, one of them. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, grabbing the back of a chair for support. "You. How the money?" "Where did you get the money?" "You never once asked about my family. Did you, Damien?" she said, a faint, mirthless smile playing on her lips. "In all our years together, you were so consumed with your own story, your own rise, that you never bothered to learn mine. You just assumed I was no one, that I came from nothing." She let the silence hang in the air before delivering the final devastating truth. "My name is Amelia Sterling Kensington. My grandfather was Arthur Kensington. You didn't divorce a struggling architect. You divorced the sole heir to Kensington Global Holdings. Damien's face went ashen. The scale of his miscalculation was so immense, so cosmically catastrophic, that his mind couldn't process it. He had thrown away a queen, a woman who held more power and wealth in her little finger than he had ever dreamed of, all for an associate. And about that complication you were so eager to get rid of. Amelia continued, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. I had a daughter. Her name is Lily Elizabeth Kensington. As my only child, she is the heir to a $47 billion fortune. You demanded a paternity test. I've had one done. Here are the results. She slid a document across the table. It confirmed with 99.99% certainty that Damien Thorne was the father. You will never see her. Amelia stated, her voice like ice. You will never have a claim to her or her inheritance. You abandoned her. You denied her. You have forfeited the right to be her father. This, she gestured around the room, symbolizing his ruined company, is your only legacy. Failure. Damien finally crumbled, slumping into a chair, his head in his hands. He was utterly, comprehensively ruined. He had lost his company, his reputation, his wealth, and the chance to know the child who was heiress to one of the world's greatest fortunes. He had traded it all for a fleeting affair and his own hubris. As Amelia turned to leave, her victory complete, the door opened and Serafina rushed in. Damien! What's happening? Who is... She stopped dead when she saw Amelia. Amelia paused and looked at the woman who had helped destroy her life. She saw the fear and confusion in Serafina's eyes. She could have said 1,000 things, gloated, savored the moment. Instead, she offered only a single dismissive glance. He's all yours now, Amelia said, her voice indifferent. And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving the architects of her misery to drown in the wreckage they had created. In the aftermath of the takeover, the name Thorne Capital Investments was erased from the financial landscape of New York. Amelia, through AS Holdings, absorbed its viable assets, folded them into the Kensington portfolio, and liquidated the rest. Damien Thorne was left with nothing but a mountain of personal debt and a reputation so toxic he would never work in finance again. The last Amelia heard, he and Serafina had separated acrimoniously, blaming each other for their downfall. He had reportedly been seen working as a consultant for a small, obscure firm in the Midwest, a king reduced to a pawn. But for Amelia, the victory was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. Revenge had been a powerful motivator, a fire that had forged her into the leader she needed to become. But she knew that fire, if left to burn, would consume her too. Her purpose was no longer defined by Damien's betrayal, but by her daughter's future. She returned to London, not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as the confident and visionary chairwoman of Kensington Global Holdings. She proved to be a natural leader, blending her grandfather's fierce business instincts with a modern, more compassionate approach. She invested heavily in sustainable technologies and ethical business practices, steering the corporate behemoth in a new direction. She established the Elizabeth Sterling Foundation, a massive global charity dedicated to funding education for underprivileged children and protecting journalists in conflict zones, a tribute to the parents she never knew. Her life was full. She split her time between the bustling energy of London and the serene peace of the Cotswolds Manor. Her days were a whirlwind of board meetings, strategic planning and philanthropic work. But her evenings were reserved for Lily. She would leave the empire at the door and become just a mother, reading bedtime stories, kissing scraped knees, and watching her daughter grow with a heart full of overwhelming love. One afternoon, while overseeing the early stages of a new project, the construction of a state-of-the-art, eco-friendly pediatric hospital in London, she found herself collaborating with a renowned architectural firm. The lead on the project was a man named Victor Beaumont. He was handsome, intelligent, and possessed a quiet integrity that was the antithesis of Damien's flashy charisma. He had been one of Damien's chief rivals, a man who built his company on innovation rather than ruthless acquisition. He approached her as they reviewed blueprints, his eyes filled with genuine admiration. "What you've done with Kensington is remarkable, Miss Kensington," he said. "You've not only honored your grandfather's legacy, you've made it your own. You've given it a conscience." Amelia smiled, a real unguarded smile. "Please call me Amelia. And thank you, Victor. I'm just trying to build something that will last." "I have no doubt you will," he said. "Foundations are everything, and yours is clearly made of something stronger than steel." As she looked at him, and then at the plans for the hospital that would save the lives of countless children, she realized he was right. She had once been the architect of a small life, a life built on the flawed foundation of Damien's love. When he had ripped it all away, she had fallen into ruin. But from those ruins, she had built something far grander. She had built an empire, a legacy, a charity, and a family. She was no longer defined by the man who had tried to destroy her, nor solely by the grandfather who had saved her. She was Amelia Sterling Kensington, a mother, a leader, a philanthropist. She was the architect of her own life, and this time the foundation was unbreakable. Her past was a story of betrayal and loss, but her future was a blueprint of her own design, a magnificent structure built not on revenge, but on resilience, love, and a strength she had discovered deep within herself. She was finally, truly free. What an incredible journey of resilience and empowerment. From the depth of a devastating betrayal to the pinnacle of global power, Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that our circumstances do not define us. It's about how we rise from the ashes, how we reclaim our narrative, and how we can build a new, stronger foundation from the wreckage of the past. She transformed her pain into purpose, not only achieving justice but also creating a better world for her daughter and countless others. Her story proves that the ultimate revenge isn't destruction, but building a life so magnificent that those who wronged you become an insignificant footnote. If Amelia's story of strength and triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama. And we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Amelia's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.